It began with a scream, but not the kind that comes from fear. It was silent screaming. A kind of silence so loud, it pressed into your chest and refused to leave. That's what the boy's world felt like: closed windows, soft walls, whispered footsteps. And far outside, in the soft gray light of morning, a man with dust on his hands moved through the mist like a memory. That was the day something changed. No thunder, no lightning. Just quiet ... and a broom scraping stone. The gardener's name was Miles Carter, though no one really asked anymore. He had once stood beneath bright lights, fists raised, sweat glistening on his skin as people shouted his name like it meant something. It had meant something. Back then, in the center of the ring, Miles had been a lion. A national champion. A name that sold tickets. But time has a way of washing even the boldest names from the walls. Now 44, he walked with the heaviness of someone who remembered too much. Shoulders strong but tired, eyes sharp but quiet. His steps were steady, slow, like every movement came from deep within. He worked for a landscaping company called Greenstone Gardens, which served the rich part of town, the part with iron gates, surveillance drones, and driveways longer than a city block. This morning, Mills had been assigned a new property. House No. 17. Family just moved in. Yard's a mess, said his foreman. Big money, don't mess it up. So just past sunrise he arrived. Thermos in one hand, wheelbarrow in the other, his boots soaked with dew, clothes worn but clean. Before him stood the house, massive, pale, silent. The walls were white stone. The windows stretched 3 stories high. Ivy hugged the corners like old secrets trying to hide. A moving truck sat quietly in the circular driveway. No workers, no noise. Just the heavy stillness of wealth settling in. Miles said nothing. He never did. Instead, he walked around the property, his boots making soft sounds on the brick path. The front yard was sculpted and stiff, but the backyard? Wild, untamed, forgotten, grass curled over stone steps. A swing set leaned like it had given up waiting for laughter. The wind moved like it was searching for something. Miles started with the hedges. He clipped them slowly, deliberately. He believed in rhythm. Even his gardening followed a kind of beat like training rounds back in the day. Cut, pull, toss, breathe. He didn't expect anyone to notice. Most homeowners never did. To them, workers were just part of the background. Furniture with heartbeat. But that morning, as he swept the walk beneath a wide bay window, he felt something. Stillness. Not the usual kind. This was different, sharp, watching. He looked up. There, behind the thick glass, sat a boy, legs tucked beneath him, shoulders curved forward, his skin pale like new clay, his eyes wide but unfocused, not looking at Miles, looking through him. He held a small blue dinosaur in his lap, not tightly, just ... holding. He didn't blink, didn't wave, just stared. Miles blinked once, then looked down and kept sweeping. But inside his chest something twisted, not pain, not fear, but something old and deep, like recognition. Inside the house, Noah Benson sat on the bench by the window like he always did, 10 years old. Barely spoke, didn't laugh, didn't cry, just ... watched. His world was small, though no one could see it from the outside. 2. The Benson family looked perfect. New to town, wealthy, handsome father, beautiful mother. Expensive clothes, clean shoes, but inside? Inside was a quiet war. Noah had been diagnosed at age 3. The doctors said words like spectrum, nonverbal, sensory processing. His parents, Graham and Elena Benson, tried everything: specialists, devices, therapy apps, even a woman from Norway who claimed she could unlock emotional memory through sound. Nothing worked. Noah didn't scream. He didn't break things. He simply disappeared into himself, staring at lights, rocking softly, humming little songs that only he understood. The family's old house had become too loud, too small, too full of stairs, so they moved. This new place, quiet, gated, private, was supposed to be a fresh start. Graham, a software executive, believed in data. He believed everything could be solved, even silence. He had turned one of the guest rooms into a therapy space, complete with LED walls, VR goggles, and soundproof panels. Noah never entered it. He preferred the window. He didn't speak to the nanny, though Miss Ruby tried every trick she knew. She sang, she read books. She even learned the sounds he made and echoed them gently. Noah never responded. But when the gardener came, he noticed that man didn't sing, didn't try to play, didn't ask questions or wave or smile with big eyes. He just showed up. And he moved in patterns, smooth, repetitive, rhythmic. It made sense to Noah's brain. The world outside was filled with random noise, but the man in the green jacket brought a kind of calm, a kind of order. He raked like someone who understood what it meant to hurt and not say anything about it. No shouts, no whistles, no one barking orders through the morning air. Only the low hum of wind through the hedges, the quiet rustle of leaves underfoot, and the slow rhythm of breath. That's what the boy noticed, not with his ears, but with his bones. No sudden claps of noise, no hands pulling at him, just earth, just rhythm. Just the man in green, moving with the calm of someone who knew what silence felt like. Ruby, the live-in nanny, tried her best with little Noah. Between folding laundry, preparing meals, and scheduling therapy sessions, she always made time to sit with him. She sang lullabies from her own childhood, whispered little jokes, even echoed the strange sounds he sometimes made when no one was looking. She tried truly, but Noah didn't respond. He never met her eyes, never reached for her hand. He waited patiently, like rain waits behind clouds, until she left the room. Then, quietly, he would return to his favorite place, the wide bench, beneath the window that faced the backyard. There, he could watch the gardener, the man in the green jacket who never looked up, never spoke, who only raked the leaves with slow, steady strokes that made perfect sense in a world that often didn't. Graham passed by the window many times a day, sometimes in a rush, sometimes barking into his headset, always with his tablet gripped like a lifeline. He was a man who dealt in logic, in numbers, in systems that could be tracked and solved. He loved his son. That wasn't the question. The question was, could he understand him? Did he eat anything today? Graham asked one evening as he strode through the hallway, barely slowing down. Some toast, Ruby replied softly. A few slices of banana. And the therapist? He wouldn't leave the window. Graham stopped. His jaw tensed, eyes narrowing slightly as he turned toward the living room. There Noah sat again, motionless on his bench, his gaze fixed out back, where the same man with the same steady hands was adjusting a flower bed. Inside the house, a war brewed, between love and frustration, between wanting to help and not knowing how. Outside, Miles Carter knelt beside the soil, unaware of the storm pressing against the glass. But Noah felt it. Not the war, not the tension. He felt the gardener. There was something about him. Something different. Something that didn't ask, didn't expect, didn't try to reach into Noah's world and pull him out. He just showed up. Every morning, before the sunlight had fully stretched across the lawn, Miles arrived. Same boots, same cap, same green shirt, faded from sun and sweat. He didn't wait at the gate. Didn't check his phone or stretch out. The morning, he moved with purpose, slow, quiet, focused. The kind of focus you find in someone who once stood in front of another man in a ring, FISTS ready, but now used those same hands to care for lavender and stone. He didn't know much about the boy behind the window. No one had told him, And he didn't ask, but every day, Miles saw him. Same position, same wide eyes, same silence. He never waved, never smiled, never made funny faces. He figured the boy had had enough people trying to make him respond. What he needed maybe was for someone not to try so hard. So Miles worked. He trimmed the hydrangeas, turning the soil gently, adding compost with practiced care. He freed the ivy strangling the fence. He watered the lavender, watching the droplets catch the light like tiny jewels before sinking into the thirsty earth. And through it all, he never once looked up, but he knew. The boy was watching. There was something sacred in rhythm. Miles thought of this often, the way boxing had taught him discipline, how the bruises came long before the victory. How gardening wasn't all that different. You showed up, you worked. And either the earth responded, or it didn't, but you showed up anyway. Then one morning, something shifted. After carefully trimming the roses along the walkway, Miles did something he hadn't done before. He reached into his old canvas bag and pulled out a red rubber ball. It wasn't shiny or new. A little scuffed around the edges, but still firm, still whole. Without a word, he placed it right in the middle of the backyard. Then turned away. He went back to raking, back to silence. Inside, Noah froze. The round shape in the grass, it didn't belong. And that meant it mattered. He didn't move. Not yet. But his fingers tapped softly against the glass. The ball remained there, quiet and waiting. The next day, still there. The next and the next. Then, on the fourth morning, it had moved. Not by wind, not by accident. Just a foot, maybe less. But enough. Miles saw it. He didn't smile, didn't react. He simply reached into his bag and pulled out a second ball smaller, blue, and placed it beside the first. Then, as always, turned back to his work. Inside, Noah's chest rose quickly. His eyes darted between the red and the blue. His hands pressed against the glass. Two shapes now, two colors, a pattern, a message. He didn't know how to answer, but he wanted to. Still no words, no sound. Just presence. And sometimes that presence was enough. The two balls sat together in the grass, catching the morning dew like they were keeping secrets. Miles never looked toward the window, but he knew. He could feel it, the stillness, the quiet watching, the way only children and animals could hold a moment without needing to break it. He knelt in the garden and began planting marigolds, orange, bright, full of fire. The soil was damp. The air smelled of life. And by mid-morning, the blue ball had moved, just slightly. Miles didn't react, but inside something bloomed, not pain, not pride, but connection, fragile, silent, real. There are moments that speak without sound. Moments where no one moves. No one speaks, and yet something between two souls stretches, trembles, then gently tightens like a thread being tied. That moment came the morning Noah began to stare, not vaguely, but with intention. His eyes, once clouded by a silence that frightened even his mother, now held a kind of quiet searching. He pressed his fingers lightly against the window glass. 4 of them, then 3, then 5, a pattern, a rhythm, a message maybe. That the gardener was doing something new. Miles knelt on one knee in the grass, not far from the corner of the flower bed. A small burlap sack rested beside him, filled with flat, smooth stones, each one carefully chosen, as if they whispered to him. When touched, one by one, he laid them down in the earth. Not randomly, not carelessly, but with purpose. The stones formed a slow, curving line beginning at the edge of the marigolds and arching like a gentle smile toward the open space in the yard. He worked in silence, the only sound coming from the soft shifting of pebbles and the hush of breeze. Through the lavender, it wasn't a design, it wasn't a demand. It was a suggestion, a question without a question mark. He didn't look at the window. didn't search for an audience. He simply moved. And then, when his hands were dusty and the line was complete, he stood, packed up his tools, and paused just once. His eyes flicked toward the glass, but the boy was gone. The bench was empty. The curtain hung motionless, untouched. Miles nodded once half to himself and left. The next morning, something was different. Not the light, not the trees, the stones. They had shifted, just slightly but deliberately. A few now sat closer together, as if someone had gently nudged them during the night. One had been turned sideways, exposing a smoother, lighter underside. And on top of a round stone, there now sat a single white pebble, perfectly placed, like punctuation, a full stop, a breath, a silent sentence that only two people could read. Miles crouched, examined the change. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply noticed. Then, without a word, he reached into his bag and pulled out a fresh green leaf oval-shaped, still moist with dew, and placed it carefully beside the white pebble. And then he stood and returned to his work. No applause, no confirmation, only rhythm. Inside the house, the usual noise continued: keyboard taps, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sharp clicks of heels on marble floors. Graham remained glued to his glowing screens, floating in a sea of charts, code, and fast-moving market lines. He barely glanced outside. To him, Noah still wasn't talking, still wasn't answering questions, still wasn't being fixed. And so in his world, nothing had changed, but something had. Later that week, Miles brought something new with him. He didn't announce it, didn't leave a note. Just tucked a small box of sidewalk chalk beneath the garden bench, 12 sticks. In bright earthy colors, worn at the edges like tiny stones that had stories in them. Then he trimmed the hedges, watered the base of the pomegranate tree, swept the walkway near the curved bench. Nothing loud, nothing grand. That afternoon, the chalk was gone. Miles didn't react. He didn't need to. That evening, just before the light drained from the sky, something faint appeared on the edge of the stone path. A drawing, wobbly, uneven, barely holding its shape. But there, a triangle, then another, lines for legs, a curve for a tail. A dinosaur, messy, beautiful. The next morning, Miles arrived earlier than usual. He knelt before the image, then reached into the chalk box and selected a stick dark green. With practiced care, he added a second dinosaur similar shape, facing the first. This one more confident, smoother, bolder. He made no show of it. Just placed the drawing beside the first, then returned to his weeding. He never once looked up. But inside the house, a small boy smiled, the first smile in years. When the sun rose the following morning, the dew kissed the sidewalk with silver. But the chalk drawings remained, clinging to the stone like whispers from a world only they could understand. Two dinosaurs, one wild, rough, uncertain. The other calm, steady, strong, side by side, frozen in time. Miles crouched low and stared at them, not with pride, but with something deeper respect. He chose a yellow stick next and drew a simple circle above the dinosaurs. Lines shot out from the center like rays. A sun, not because it was needed, but because it belonged. Days passed, and a rhythm settled between them, an invisible gentle dance of chalk and silence. Some days, the drawings would be changed. Noah would add tiny eyes to the creatures, or awkward, boxy feet. Other times, he'd erase parts, only to redraw them bigger, bolder, fuller. Miles never scolded, never corrected. He simply joined in. Their drawings grew sometimes simple, sometimes strange. There were no footprints around them. Noah came like wind. Never seen, only felt. One afternoon, Miles drew an entire scene. 3 dinosaurs. A jagged volcano in the background. Tufts of spiky green, meant to be prehistoric trees. He used orange to shade the lava, brown for the trunks, gray to suggest shadows. The next morning, it was changed. The volcano now glowed a vibrant orange, thicker, brighter. A long streak of blue curled across the top. The sky. Noah had added the sky. Inside the house, Graham finally noticed. At first he thought the drawings were some distraction, the gardener passing time. But when he confronted Miles, all he received was a calm nod and 5 quiet words. "It's not for me, him." There was no defense in the tone. No explanation. Just truth. Graham said nothing. But a small crack formed inside the armor he wore like a second skin. Later that week, Graham did something he never did. He stood behind the curtain in the hallway, sipping black coffee, watching. Outside, Miles drew what looked like a spaceship. A big one, round and tilted, with windows and landing legs. Then he stepped back and returned to his work, leaving the drawing half finished. Graham watched for several minutes. Then, without warning, Noah opened the front door, barefoot, wordless. He padded silently toward the path, picked up a stick of chalk, and without looking at anyone, added 3 tiny circles beneath the spaceship, landing lights. Then he turned and disappeared back inside. Graham stood frozen behind the curtain. His mug trembled in his hand. He didn't speak for a long time. That night, he called the therapist and canceled the week's sessions. He wasn't sure why, he just did. The next day, Noah stayed outside longer. He didn't talk, didn't laugh. But he walked along the edge of the flower bed, letting his fingers graze the petals like a soft greeting. Miles didn't speak, didn't draw attention to it. He just worked. But every now and then, he let a small smile rise on his face. Quiet, honest. That weekend, a new drawing appeared. A towering T-Rex with sharp teeth and thick legs stood at the edge of the sidewalk, and in front of it a smaller one. Facing it, mirroring it, Noah's drawing. A conversation. Sunday morning, Graham stepped outside and saw them. He turned to Miles, who was watering the roses near the gate. "That one's new," Graham said. Miles nodded without turning. "He added it last night." Graham crouched down, examining the details, the angles, the colors, the emotion behind every shaky line. "Why dinosaurs?" he asked. Miles shrugged. Gently. "I used to love them as a kid," he replied. Thought maybe he did too. Graham stared at the sidewalk, then back at the man before him. His voice softened. "He smiled yesterday," he whispered. "My son." I saw him smile. Miles didn't reply. He simply kept watering the roses. But that quiet nod he gave, that was all the answer Graham needed. Graham stood at the edge of the driveway, arms folded, jaw tight. He had built his entire career on logic, structure, and measurable results. He had sat across from heads of corporations and negotiated billion-dollar systems into existence. Efficiency was his language. Strategy was his compass. Yet here he was barefoot in his own yard staring at a man who owned no certifications, spoke in half sentences, and somehow had reached his son more deeply than any doctor, specialist, or machine ever had. And Graham didn't understand why. Miles stood calmly by the hedge, coiling the garden hose with deliberate care. The water had just stopped flowing, but droplets still clung to his gloves like tiny crystals. The soft scent of hibiscus lingered in the air between them. Graham stepped forward. "I need to understand something," he said quietly, with the edge of desperation hidden just beneath the surface. Miles didn't flinch. He simply paused and turned, his body language easy, hands relaxed at his sides. "All right," he replied, as though he'd been expecting this moment. "You're not a therapist," Graham began, pacing slightly. "You're not a behavioral specialist. You didn't study this. You don't have ... training." Miles said nothing, just waited. "And yet," Graham continued, voice tightening, "my son, he smiles now. He goes outside. he responds. Miles nodded once, calmly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Graham's breath caught for a moment, then pushed forward like a stone rolling down a hill. How are you doing this? He asked. Miles looked him in the eye, steady, unshaken. I'm not doing anything to him, sir, he said. I just show up, same time, same way, and I make space. Graham frowned, confused. Space? Miles nodded again. Most folks try to fix kids like him, he said slowly. I don't. If he wants to draw, we draw. If he wants to sit, we sit. If he wants nothing, then that's what we do. Graham crossed his arms, clearly unsettled. So you're saying what? That all the specialists we've hired, all the tech, all the therapy, none of that mattered? Miles didn't answer right away. Instead, he bent down, picked up a loose garden stone, and brushed the dirt from its smooth surface. He turned it over in his hand and then looked back up. I'm saying, he said gently, sometimes what a person needs isn't someone telling them what to do, but someone who stays, even when they don't. There was no bitterness in his tone. No judgment, just truth. And it hit Graham harder than any shouted advice ever had. Like a rock placed silently on the heart-heavy, unmoving, undeniable. Later, Graham sat alone in his home office, surrounded by folders and glossy brochures from top-tier medical centers. All of them promised answers. All of them claimed to unlock children like Noah with science and intervention. He stared blankly at the stack, then at the open window. Outside, Noah sat quietly on the stone steps, chalk dust on his pants, humming softly. He wasn't watching a screen. He wasn't wearing headphones. He wasn't in the therapy room upstairs. He was just being. That evening at dinner, Noah did something new. He stood up from the table, walked to the patio door, and stepped outside barefoot, slow, certain. The sun was melting behind the trees, casting gold across the lawn. Miles was already gone for the day, but the sidewalk told a story. 2 dinosaurs stood drawn in chalk, and beside them, a third shape, a taller figure, broad and simple, possibly a tree, possibly a person. Noah touched it gently with one finger. Did you draw that? Graham asked from the doorway, his voice soft, almost afraid to shatter the moment. Noah didn't speak, but he smiled, and that was enough. That night, after tucking Noah into bed, Graham returned to his laptop. He began to draft an email to the child development consultant in Zurich. It was all lined up in executive relocation. Package, a high-ranking position overseas. Guaranteed access to cutting-edge support for Noah. He typed the first sentence, then stopped. His fingers hovered. The words on the screen blurred, then disappeared as he pressed delete. Slowly, intentionally, he closed the laptop. He didn't know why yet. He just did. The next morning, Graham rose before the sun and walked outside quietly. Miles was already there, trimming the hibiscus near the front wall. He didn't greet Graham or stop working. He just moved with his usual rhythm, methodical, calm, present. Graham stood nearby for a moment, unsure. Then finally asked, "Do you think you could teach me?" Miles looked up, surprised. "Teach you what?" Graham exhaled. "How to be present." Miles tilted his head, considering. He gave a small smile. "Just a little," he said. "It's not something you teach, it's something you practice." They stood in silence, the early light warming the grass. For the first time, they were not simply employee and employer. They were 2 men, 2 fathers, in their own way trying to understand the same boy. That same morning, Miles arrived just as always, but something had changed. Noah was already outside. He sat cross-legged by the garden path, small hands moving slowly, arranging pebbles into a careful line. Some dark, some smooth, some shaped like drops of water. Miles didn't call out. He didn't break the rhythm. He simply knelt nearby, pulled a few stones from his own bag, and began lining them up, different colors, different shapes. Not to copy, not to lead. Just to join. Noah looked at him once. Just once. Then returned to his task. A new ritual began. In the afternoons, they played with the garden hose. Miles would tilt the nozzle and arc the water through the air. Noah would squeal softly and spin, letting the drops chase him, but never too close. Always with space between. It wasn't noisy joy, it was quiet, controlled, but it was joy. On other days, they played what Miles called touchless tag. Noah would dart across the lawn, looking back just enough to be followed. When he stopped, Miles stopped. When he moved, Miles moved. A chase with invisible rules. A game where presence was the prize. Graham watched them from the kitchen window. No technology. No programs, no reward charts, no blinking devices. Just presence. It unsettled him at first. But he couldn't deny what he saw. He joined them one afternoon. He didn't say anything. Didn't announce himself. He just bent down, picked up a stone, and added it to Noah's line. Noah paused. Looked. At him. Then placed another stone, not touching his father's, but not far from it either. That was enough. Miles noticed. He didn't say a word. Just kept planting lavender along the edge of the garden. Each afternoon, when the last email had been ignored and the notification silenced, Graham Benson stepped outside. Sometimes he grabbed a rake and quietly helped Miles gather leaves into soft mounds. Other times he simply sat on the low stone bench near the garden's edge, elbows on his knees, eyes following the movement of the boy and the gardener. Occasionally, he'd ask a question not about business or charts, but about plants. When's the best time to prune jasmine? How do you keep lavender from drying out? Miles always answered simply. Never rushed. Never lectured. It wasn't about the gardening. It was about learning how to wait, how to be still in the presence of growth. The expensive therapy equipment upstairs, the sound panels, the virtual goggles, the custom chair with vibrating arms began to collect dust. Noah hadn't touched them in weeks. And for once, no one forced him to. One afternoon, while the garden breathed in the golden hour, Noah did something unexpected. He pointed. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. No music swelled. No one gasped. He simply extended one finger small, deliberate toward a low branch where a blue jay rested, its feathers glowing in the slanting light. His eyes were wide, his breath quiet but alive. Miles followed his gaze and nodded. He smiled. So did Noah. From the porch, Graham watched, his chest tightening. He didn't speak. He didn't move, but inside something uncoiled. Later that week, Noah dragged a bucket from the shed, filled it with water, and dunked both hands deep into it. He lifted them, dripping, and turned toward Miles. Then, with a flick, he splashed him, just once. A quiet invitation. Miles blinked, surprised, then grinned. And responded. For the first time, their laughter rose into the air, not loud, not wild, but real. That evening, Graham and Miles stood side by side, watching Noah run barefoot through the grass. He used to be afraid of the grass, Graham said, half to himself. Used to cry if we tried to bring him outside. Miles said nothing. Then Graham added softly, he didn't cry today. Miles replied with a simple, no. He didn't. And they let the silence do the rest. By the end of that week, the sidewalk was no longer filled with dinosaurs. New figures had appeared. Human shapes drawn with chalk and soft colors. 2 of them, one tall, one small. Both smiling. Graham crouched beside the drawings and studied them for a long time. They didn't need names. He already knew who they were. On a quiet Tuesday morning, a white envelope arrived. A courier handed it off without a word. Graham barely looked at the label. He was used to paperwork, proposals, contracts, updates from the board. but this envelope felt heavier. Inside was the offer. A formal executive transfer to Zurich, double his current salary. A penthouse in the heart of the city. An elite support package for Noah with access to Europe's top specialists. His name sat at the top. The decision was his. He read it once, then again, then again. And after that, he didn't look at the words. He looked outside. Noah was in the grass, crouched beside Miles. They were using sticks to draw shapes in the soil, circles, triangles, lines that danced and twisted and led nowhere, but made perfect sense to them. Graham placed the paper down and rubbed his forehead. That evening, at dinner, he brought it up to his wife. They approved Zurich, he said. Effective in 3 weeks. Elenia froze, fork halfway to her mouth. We'd need to start packing soon, he added. Elenia didn't reply right away. She glanced down the hallway, where Noah was stacking books, deliberate, careful, methodical. He's just now engaging, she whispered. Just starting to reach out. She turned back to her husband. This thing with Miles, you've seen it too, haven't you? Graham nodded. It's real. But if we leave, she began, then stopped. They didn't need to finish the sentence. The silence filled in the rest. That night, Graham wandered into the garden alone. He stood where Miles usually stood, the rake leaned nearby. The soil still held warmth from the day. Everything looked the same, but it felt different without him. Graham pulled out his phone and began typing a message to his assistant. Then stopped, deleted it, and went back inside. The next morning, Miles arrived early, gloves on, shovel in hand. He was ready to work, but Graham met him at the gate. We might be moving, he said simply. Switzerland. It's a big step for my career. Miles nodded slowly, brushing dirt from his palm. Graham looked down. I don't know what to do. Miles didn't speak at first. He looked past Graham toward the house. Noah was at the window, fingers resting against the glass. You already know, Miles said finally. You just haven't said it out loud. Graham's breath caught in his throat. Because it was true. That day Miles didn't plant anything. Instead, he handed Noah a small wooden box filled with smooth, colorful stones, red, blue, green, white. Noah's fingers moved with ease, dancing across the surfaces. He selected them one by one, arranging them in a long snaking line across the patio. At the very end, he placed a single white stone, then stood beside it. Graham watched from the porch. His heart was heavy, but not with sadness, with truth. That night, he and Elenia sat in silence. They had wealth, security, a future paved in gold. But in all their years of rising and rushing, chasing titles and collecting keys, they had never seen Noah smile like he did around Miles. Graham opened the drawer, pulled out the Zurich letter, and read it one more time. Then quietly placed it in the fireplace. The paper curled in on itself, orange, then black. Upstairs, Noah slept soundly. In the garden, a sunflower swayed gently in the breeze, planted weeks ago by Miles, with no guarantee it would bloom. And yet here it stood, tall, open, alive. The next morning, Graham didn't go to work. Didn't check his email, didn't reach for his phone. He stood at the kitchen window, holding a mug, watching Noah in the yard. The boy was laying stones again, this time in quiet arcs, mirroring the patterns he'd learned by watching. That afternoon, Graham drove beyond the gates of their neighborhood, past the trim hedges and designer houses. He turned onto cracked roads where murals faded and sidewalks buckled. He stopped at a small community park, the one Miles once mentioned. There, kneeling beside a dry planter box, was Miles, helping an old man pull weeds from the roots of a twisted fig tree. Miles looked up, not surprised. I need to talk, Graham said, hands buried in his coat pockets. Miles stood slowly, wiping dirt from his fingers. I figured. They sat on a sun-warmed bench nearby. Children shouted in the distance. A dog barked, then quieted. I used to think I could fix everything, Graham admitted. If I just had enough money, enough science, enough control. He paused. I thought Noah needed technology, structure, programs. Miles didn't respond right away. Then said, "Staying's harder than it sounds." Graham looked down at his shoes. "Why did you keep coming?" Even before he responded, Miles didn't hesitate. "I wasn't waiting for him to change," he said softly. "I was showing him I wasn't going anywhere." Graham exhaled slowly. "I've never met anyone like you." "I'm just a gardener," Miles replied, not with modesty, but certainty. "I plant things, I wait, I watch, and sometimes I bloom." Graham studied him, and for the first time saw more than the man who trimmed hedges. He saw a man who had once stood in a ring, lost a future, and still chose to show up for someone else's child. "Would you ever consider doing more with this?" Graham asked. "Something bigger? For other kids like Noah?" Miles raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a promotion?" Graham chuckled, then turned serious. "No. I'm offering you a partnership. Not charity, not employment. Something real. You lead it, I fund it. Nature, rhythm, trust. Everything you already do instinctively." Miles stared across the street at the lot filled with broken glass and weeds. "That used to be a garden," he said quietly. "Before the city." "Forgot it," Graham nodded. "Then maybe it's time someone remembered." They shook hands. Not as employer and worker, but as men building something new. Back at the house, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Noah sat alone in the garden. The stones were gone now. In their place fluttered tiny paper flags, each marked with a symbol: sun, tree, spiral, star. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He had already understood. Spring unfolded, and the earth remembered how to soften. What had once been an empty city lot now buzzed with life. Raised beds sprouted mint and marigold. Children wandered between rows, laughter echoing against the old brick. At the entrance stood a wooden sign, hand-painted with care: "The Blooming Ground." At the heart of it all stood Miles Carter, his hands deep in soil, guiding small fingers through planting, not as an expert, not as a teacher, but as someone simply sharing time. Noah came every day, no longer hidden, no longer unreachable. He didn't talk, but he didn't need to. His presence had become its own language, one others could feel, even if they couldn't name it. One afternoon, he planted a sunflower seed. Next to him, another child copied the movement. They didn't speak, didn't make eye contact, but they moved in harmony. Graham visited often. Never with a briefcase anymore. Sometimes he brought tools, sometimes lemonade. So, times nothing at all. He simply came and watched and learned a language of patience. They no longer asked for outcomes. They planted, they waited, and things bloomed. If this story touched something quiet in you, something real, don't just scroll past. Leave a comment, share your journey, and subscribe to walk with us as we keep planting stories that grow. Here, we don't rush healing, we honor it, one truth at a time.